Hello, I'm Superintendent Rashid, and if you're joining us here today, it's probably because you're interested in a policing career with the CPS. As you know, regrettably, with the COVID-19 pandemic and social gathering restrictions, we're not able to hold our regular recruiting information sessions where we'll be able to answer your questions as prospective candidates for applying for a job with the CPS. Today, however, we have the next best thing. With the help of a panel of experts from our recruiting unit, we're going to bring the information session to you wherever you are. With that being said, I'd like to introduce our expert panel. We have Constables Andy Buck and Jonathan Crespo from our recruiting unit, and joining us today is Constable Tess Hare from District 1, the Downtown Core. Tess recently graduated from the CCLC, the Chief Crowfoot Learning Centre, and she's going to bring her own anecdotal experience as to her thoughts and experiences as she too recently went through the application and hiring process. We're going to talk about the recruiting process from beginning to the end, so please feel free to use this as a reference video as you too consider going through the application process. With that said, we'd like to start with you, Jonathan. Perhaps you can tell us about the very first thing that prospective candidates should do before they consider applying with the CPS.
The very first thing that anybody should do is go to our website, which is join.calgarypolice.ca. And from there, there's plenty of additional information on the recruiting process, the application process, and CPS in general. And from there, of course, that's where you're going to submit your application to begin with.
And now I understand that the next step is kind of reconciling or cataloging the various tests that are required.
The written tests are the first test that an applicant will go through. But what's important to know is that before an applicant even gets to that point, the file would go through numerous hands in the recruiting unit just to make sure that everything that should be submitted has been submitted and that there are no red flags to us in terms of undetected criminal activity or anything that is less desirable. At that point, the file is allocated to a file manager, one of the recruiting team, who would make contact with you, the applicant, and then we would invite you for your written tests. So the tests are two-part, an English component and a cognitive abilities component, just designed to check whether you think the way that a police officer would think.
Excellent. And what are the passing scores for each test? What is the pass grade?
Okay, well the first test, the communications test, there are 134 questions. They're all multiple choice, so the right answer is there, you just need to find it. The passing score there is 73, so that's a 55% pass mark. The second test is out of 120. Pass mark is 84, so that's 70%.
And in the event that a candidate fails either one of these tests, is there an opportunity to rewrite, and is there a time delay in between which the candidate can rewrite the test?
Yes, there's a deferral period, but the applicant would always be afforded the opportunity to retake those tests. The deferral periods are slightly different for the tests. So for the first test, the communication test, if you're unsuccessful on the first write, it's a minimum of 1 month deferral. If you're unsuccessful the second time, it's a 6-month deferral, and the deferral period doubles after each successive failed attempt, so 12 months, 24 months. With the second test, the cognitive abilities test, it's a 1 month deferral if you're unsuccessful at the first write, 3-month deferral on the second write. However, it's like a 3 strikes and you're out rule. If you're unsuccessful on the third write, you would be deferred for life by the Calgary Police Service and any other municipal service within the province of Alberta. Or it's important to note that that's not a Calgary Police Service rule, that's a Solicitor General requirement.
Excellent. And so, as I understand it correctly, the ACT, or the Alberta Communications Test, unlimited attempts, whereas the APCAT, the Police Cognitive Ability Test, provincially mandated a maximum of 3 times.
That's correct. With regards to the communication test, that unlimited attempts is in theory. Of course, if an applicant is unsuccessful for a number of attempts, and we're then talking about 2-year deferral or 4-year deferral, maybe we're having that conversation about their suitability in the first place.
Understood. I'm just going to switch over to tests really quick. Do you have any practical tips or guidance from your experience for prospective candidates as to preparing for the ACT or the APCAT tests?
Well, what I did, I went online, I ordered this book, and it was kind of like a prep for both of these tests. And for me, it was really nice to kind of get some insight as to what the tests were going to be on. Kind of definitions for the communication test, the cognitive abilities, just kind of knowing directions, memorizing certain things from like a diagram or a driver's license or something, and then going through other stages and then having to go back and kind of remember what was outlined in that initial part.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. And then next, Jonathan, we have the A-Prep, as I understand it, right? Tell us a little bit about that and what that entails.
The first part of the A-Prep is the pursuit restraint circuit. To view the test, just log on to our website and you'll see the video of exactly what it looks like. But part of the test is running laps around the gym. You'll have to hop over a wall, up and down some stairs. There's a series of weights, for example, the push-pull machine attached to a weight, the handcuff simulation attached to a weight, plus a body drag. Following that is the léger, where one has to achieve a score of level 7 in order to be successful in the test. A big component of being successful at the A-Prep is having the physical strength to handle the weights and of the body drag and both machines, and the cardiovascular fitness to be successful at both tests, especially the léger.
And so what are the time limits on the test?
For the PRC, it's a limit of 2 minutes and 10 seconds. If you hit 2 minutes 11, that's too much. For the léger, like I was saying, you have to reach level 7.
I know there's a lot of acronyms here in the testing. The A-Prep, in fact, if you're going to research this online, stands for the Alberta Physical Readiness Evaluation for Police Test. And so it simulates, I think, what the average patrol officer is expected to encounter in their duties.
And I think that's exactly the idea. It's a simulation. Of course, it's not going to be what one would experience in classes, but you do wear a weighted belt to simulate wearing a police belt. And the push-pull and the handcuff machines are designed to, again, simulate struggling with an uncooperative offender.
I'm wondering, Tess, what did you do to kind of ready yourself for the test? Did you do any specific training, or what advice can you give us?
I ran kind of 1 mile a few times a week just to try and get faster and faster, just kind of increase your speed as you go through it. I did a lot of training with a weighted vest just to kind of get used to carrying the weight around, stuff like that. And I know being a female, typically the push-pull, the restraint, that part of the circuit is a little harder based on upper body strength. So just focusing on that if that's kind of one of your weak points.
Excellent. And so, Jonathan, the time limits are the same as Tess mentioned for both males and females then?
Exactly. The standard is 2 minutes, 10 seconds for everybody.
We offer an orientation session for all applicants who will be afforded the opportunity to come, speak with and meet with our fitness unit team, get some tips as to how to operate this machinery, because it can be a little intimidating. It's not mandatory to take part in an orientation session, but if it's something that you think is a little intimidating, why not take that opportunity to come and do that?
Is that still available given our current pandemic situation as well, Andy?
Yes, it is. In terms of the orientation session, that would only be offered to applicants who are in the process, and your file manager will speak to you about dates and availability and take you through that.
Also great advice. Thank you. So once we've gone through some of the rigors of some of the testing, perhaps you can explain what the preliminary interview, the personal disclosure piece looks like first.
Okay, so the personal disclosure interview is a one-on-one meeting with your file manager, where together we will go through question by question each of the questions on your personal disclosure form. The personal disclosure form is part of your application that you would have initially have submitted, where you're recalling every incident relative to those questions from the age of 5 onwards. So if you stole a candy bar from the corner store at age 7, then yes, we're going to want to know about that. There could be things that have happened since you pressed submit and sent us your application, so we need to get that up to date. There could be things that will look at questions from a slightly different perspective, and it may just jog your memory about something which you'd initially answered no to, but in fact now you need to change that to a yes. Past behaviour is indicative of future behaviour. That's what we work on. But we're also not looking for no disclosures from an applicant. So honesty and integrity are paramount. Whatever you have done, we've all done things that we're less proud of. Within reason, of course, there's always exceptions, but we're more interested in whether you're going to tell us what you've done as opposed to what you've done.
And so earlier you said that, record everything from age 5 up. What if there's been lapses of memory? I mean, we're all getting older and we don't specifically remember certain things that we may or may not have done. How do we reconcile that?
That's true. That's why I caveat that by saying we're looking ahead to the poly. There are always going to be things that people forget, but never write something off as, I don't remember, because you're concerned that it may reflect poorly on you, because that will come to light at polygraph, and then there's a whole other degree of jeopardy then.
I understand. So, Jonathan, there is an interview that comes shortly thereafter. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about what that looks like.
That's right. So the panel interview is what you're referring to. That comes following the disclosure interview. So the panel interview consists of 3 CPS members asking the candidate a series of questions specific to the core competencies. And the candidate will respond with an example that clearly shows that they're qualified in that core competency using the STAR format, which is situation, task, action, and result.
Tess, any pointers or tips for how to prepare for a behavioral descriptive interview?
So the career I had before this had a similar structure to CPS. So I kind of approached my kind of higher ups in the organization. We went through my examples. For me, the biggest thing was practicing the interview and not just kind of having the ums and the likes and all that kind of stuttering throughout it, as well as making sure it was following the STAR format, just making sure that it was laid out properly, you emphasize your action.
And so bringing examples from your personal life and your professional life, that's acceptable, Andy?
We need to see examples that best evidence your possession of these competencies, wherever that might come from. But ultimately, this is a test you need to pass to move on. So I always tell my applicants, use your best examples.
For more information on the panel interview, please watch our core competencies video on our website. And so as far as subsequent testing after the behavioral descriptive interview or panel interview, as you called it, there's a psychological test, as I understand it. Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so there is a psychological test consisting of a series of multiple choice questions used to build a psychological profile of the candidate. And from there, it's just a simple pass or fail. You can't study for this test. There is no material to read beforehand like the ACT or the APCAT. It's simply you walk in and then you participate in the test. And I understand that can sound a little bit intimidating, that there's a test that you can't prepare for. The only thing that you should really keep in mind before attending this test is be open and honest when participating in the test. Not only is your test reviewed during polygraph, but that's the only way to get an accurate assessment. If you try to game the test by answering strategically, you may fail by accident because you're providing false answers.
So with applicants residing outside of Calgary, is there a remote way that a psychological test can be administered?
No, unfortunately, a remote or a candidate that lives outside of Calgary will need to travel to Calgary to participate in this part of the process.
And so on the heels of that, Andy, you talked a little bit about earlier the personal disclosure, that it informs a polygraph interview that comes later. Tell us a little bit about that.
The polygraph test, yeah, it's conducted again here on site. We have 3 polygraph detectives. The simplest way to describe it is a truth verifier, rather than thinking of it as a lie detector. It's designed to verify the information that has been provided to us throughout the application, particularly at the personal disclosure.
So Tess, do you remember your test, your polygraph?
I definitely do.
How did you find that experience?
It was about 4 hours sitting with the detective, and I was surprised to know that only about 15 minutes of it I was actually hooked up to the polygraph machine. But going into it, we had 4 different pieces of paper, and we combed through what we did in the PDI, the interview, all that sort of stuff. So by the time I sat down and got hooked up to the actual machine, my mind was empty, and that was what made me successful. Pretty much we just kind of repeated what you put in your personal disclosure in the interview. So it was just kind of fine combing and making sure that like you weren't going to have anything come up mid polygraph.
Once we've kind of cataloged and inventoried and got the results of all these tests, Andy, tell us a little bit about a background investigation that comes subsequent to that then.
As part of your application, you will provide to us a list of references. We understand that these are going to be people that are going to say good things about you. So not only are we going to take up those references, we're going to speak to your current employer. We're going to speak to previous employers. And we also operate on a cascading reference basis. And what I mean by that is that your boss might be able to provide us some information about you, but he might say that you worked very closely with John Smith, for example, on a project. So even though John Smith is not part of your references, we're going to be speaking to them. So that's what we mean by cascading.
And so what information as a potential candidate should I provide to my references anticipating that there's going to be a background investigation?
I think right off the top, the most important thing is tell your references to expect a phone call from an unlisted number.
Okay.
So that we actually have the opportunity to speak to them and they don't think they're receiving another telemarketer or another scam and they don't bother answering the phone.
So the elephant in the room, Andy, is you know everything about me. You've done all this testing and you understand everything right down to my psychological profile. What's the point of doing a background investigation?
I think it's to ascertain from friends and from co-workers and from an employer what you're like as an individual, and just to confirm that you do indeed possess those skills, those abilities from a workplace environment. What's important to know as well, because we get asked this all the time, is at what point does this happen? So these references are taken up at the end of the process rather than at the front end, because at some point you're going to have to tell your current employer what your plans are. So that's why we do it at the back end rather than the front end, to reduce any jeopardy for you.
And I think from an organizational perspective too, is that the CPS subscribes to core values. And I think while a lot of the testing looks at certain behaviors, things like integrity and honesty are measured throughout, I think it's an opportunity, Jonathan, I think you said it earlier, for your employers and your references to kind of validate some of those character traits that confirm to the organization whether or not the candidate possesses those core values or not. So that's important as well. So then once we have the application package complete, what then happens next to all this information, Andy? Where does it go?
So once all the testing has been done and we get the file back that confirms that from a backgrounding perspective you are supported as an applicant, we would look to present your file to an executive committee made up of senior managers, executive members of the service, who will review everything and ultimately make a determination on whether you have been successful or not.
As far as the selection committee itself is concerned, are the members there kind of permanent fixtures, or is it on a rotating basis? You'll see different personalities go through that committee.
The members of the panel can vary, but they all stick to strict standards so that everybody gets assessed the same way.
Tess, how long did it take you to get through your application process?
I put in my application, it was early 2018. In the fall of 2018, I got a 6-month deferral. Leading up to that, so because I was from out of Calgary, I'm originally from BC, all my testing was put into 1 week. So mid-summer of 2018, I came to Calgary. Sunday through Thursday, I did all the testing back to back to back. Found out I got a 6-month deferral. I redid some testing in early February of 2019. I got put into classes, but then due to injury, I got told that I needed to do some more physical testing. So I got taken out of that class, flew back to Calgary, did some more testing. Everything was good. Had to do the APREP again because that expires every 6 months. Oh. And then I got placed into classes for the first time in July of 2019. So it was just over a year, my whole process, from the date I clicked submit to the day I sat in the class.
Congratulations, that's
Thank you.
Excellent. And character of perseverance, no doubt. Right? So
we certainly try our best to schedule everything all at once, just like Tessa's case, where if you're coming from out of town, you only have to commit the time and money to travel here once. If you get deferred at any point, you might have to come back for a second trip. But best case scenario, we do book everything for 1 week, pass everything in that 1 week, and then it's over.
The final stage, to pass, is going to be that conditional offer. Really, the condition is going to be satisfactory passing of a pre-employment medical. We'll arrange for that medical to be done. As long as that comes back all well and good, then we're looking at getting you inserted into a recruit class.
Great conversation. I mean, I understand this is a very technical conversation, and there are lots of nuances to the recruiting process. It's been very well thought out. It's robust. But what I took away from it, from Tess's experience, is that there's some flexibility. There's a human element to it as well. And so that's encouraging for people that are considering applying with the CPS. I'd like to thank you all for the conversation. I certainly learned a lot from it. And I'd like to thank those of you that tuned in today. Don't forget to check out our other segment videos for information on all things with the career with the CPS. Thank you for watching, and we appreciate you joining us today.